My first time was I was a freshman dance major at DeSales University, where the Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival is, and the role was Puck, and I say this to people, but I mean it. You might find this hard to believe, but I really think that, and one of the performances is archived, but I wouldn't want to see it just because I know what I wasn't doing in that role as an actor. But I loved moving in that role. Like, this was back in my dancing days, so to speak. And my entrance into doing Shakespeare was from a rope, way up on a platform behind the stage left proscenium, and I had swung in on this rope to do that scene with the first fairy. And I remember that it was just a very dancey sort of, portrayal of Puck, and I was like, man, this is fun. This is
what
really,
were you
really
wearing?
funny. Nothing from the waist up, and then like some sort of tights and ballet shoes that were sort of painted blue-green or something, leafy green, and the whole set sort of looked like an aquarium, is the way I remember it. And we were painted in some sort of teal body paint. Yeah, I still have a photograph.
Can you please bring it?
Yes. Yeah, I'll show it to you.
I want to see that.
Yes, that was my first Shakespeare, Puck, Midsummer Night's Dream.
Wow.
DeSales University.
My first was at university too. It was Macbeth. I played Banquo. And I remember, I don't remember. The director had been to Japan recently, and he had a thing about Budo and wanting the witches to be looking like Budo dancers from Japan. So they were all bald and white, and he had this whole sort of like post-nuclear kind of fallout vision of it, and it was, but that's all I remember really about it. And there were heads, like there are in our play. There were heads that bled blood. And that's about all I remember. But I was really not big into Shakespeare when I was a kid, when I was in high school and stuff. Like, I read Hamlet, and I loved Hamlet, because, every kid loves, well, not every kid, but I think a lot of people obviously read Hamlet, and there's something about that angst and that search for identity and all of that feels very immediate when you're a kid. But other than that, I was like, they talk weird, it's bizarre. I was into like Eugene O'Neill and Tennessee Williams and like realist stuff, and that was my thing. And Shakespeare just seemed all sort of fancy stuff that didn't touch me in some way. And then I remember the first time I felt differently was when I saw Branagh's Henry V film, which I think is the best Shakespeare he ever did on film. And suddenly it was like the stakes were so big, and people were talking to each other like people, and like the poetry was still there, but it felt all real and immediate and full of humanity and complexity. And I was just like, oh, it can be like this? Wait a minute. And that was when I really got sort of drawn into it. And then I went to do a semester abroad in London, and I saw a bunch of Shakespeare, of course, because you can in London for so cheap, especially when you're a student. And I remember I saw Ian McKellen play Richard III, and all these like big people doing this stuff, and I don't know, there was something that I took to it in some way. Like I understood it in a way that it seemed like a lot of my fellow students weren't quite able to wrap their brain. I don't know, something the way my brain worked or something. The language and I was able to sort of tune into it, whatever frequency Shakespeare's on. I was able to, and I got really into it suddenly, and like I wanted to do it all the time. And I got lucky enough when I moved to Chicago after college to fall in with a theater company there it was at the time called Shakespeare Rep, and now it's called Chicago Shakespeare. And I just ended up kind of getting involved with them and getting a chance to do a lot of Shakespeare and watch these terrific actors do Shakespeare and learn from that. And that was a huge education for me. And then, sort of gradually being, as you are as a young actor, you're given more,
Yeah.
more to do, until finally they say, okay, now we have a leading role for you. And the first one for that, for me at Chicago Shakespeare, was Richard II, which was like a huge,
Maui.
a big moment for me to have to step into that.
Mhm.
And still one of the most terrifying opening nights I've ever had in my life. But yeah, so anyway, yeah, so that's a little about where I started and a little about the journey, I guess.
Yeah.
But
I find both of you in different ways have such a closeness to the text, and just the way in which both of you approach language, specifically Shakespeare's text, feels so intimate, but also so powerful and so clear. I was wondering if you have any, on your journeys that you've been on as Shakespearean actors, if there's any kind of things that come to mind in terms of your personal approaches to this language that jumps out in your mind when you think about specifically bringing these now almost 500-year-old words to the stage today.
I think for me, it sort of ties back with, to me, to what I remember being one or two kind of epiphany sort of moments when I was young. Like my first, light bulb moment or whatever with the Shakespeare, sort of like the Henry V film for you, was my mom somehow had this idea that I was going to be an actor before I had ever done anything like that. And I don't know why. My parents were not showbiz people at all. But they certainly appreciated great art, and when they would see a film that they felt like we need to see, I think that at one point, I was still quite young, but it couldn't have been the first release, but it was probably a second release in the theaters of Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet. And my mom insisted that we all go see it. And for some reason, she was pointed out anyway, Mercutio, I think was played by John McKennery in that film. And it's just tremendous. But I remember my mom saying, I must have been, 8 or 9 or something. And she was like, that's a role you're going to play. And I was like, oh, cool, whatever. But I think I do remember, for some reason, just his performance when I was little was like a magnet. And I think that why is because I felt like someone was just speaking and living in the language, and I was understanding it somehow, like a kid that I was hanging out with or playing with or climbing a tree with or something. Like it had that thing. I don't think I understood what in the hell else was going on in that film, in a sense. And I remember one other thing too, and it sort of has to do with this question of the language to me anyway. In one of my English classes in high school, we were reading Hamlet, and probably before I had ever really seen any professional theater, certainly Shakespeare, and that was all one. So I had read and understood the play, and I had a very enthusiastic English teacher at the time, so that helps. But it was just flipping channels again with my mom, and we hit PBS, and it was probably an RSC taped production of Hamlet with Derek Jacobi in the role. And then, because I sort of knew the play, I was like, whoa. And that's when I just thought that, wow, there's really something about this, that it's, and for me too, then, as the years, went by, it was just a thing where, it's sort of like you can hear people say this, but when you sort of light on the fact that, oh my God, this stuff and this verse is actually the same rhythm that we speak in today. The same rhythm we speak in today, the same rhythm that we speak in today. It's like, it's all there. And it's in a way, it has the rhythm of contemporary speech. And I think that once I realized that, I just sort of look for that, even if I'm playing Duncan and trying to be a king in front of all these people, there's a thing where and I think that I go through different phases with it. If I'm having a problem with something, I'm like, you're doing something, but you're not talking right now. It's like, okay, let me erase the verse. What's the sentence? What am I saying here? You know, and I kind of constantly drill myself like that.
Yeah.
And I like it. It's so much more fun fun and easy for me anyway, to memorize, particularly verse, as opposed to a contemporary
It's a lot
play.
easier.
Even though it might be brilliant, and indeed, I just did a play like a couple years ago that was written by Hannah Moscovich. Brilliant dialogue-tician, unbelievable. Just, I'm still blown away even when I think about it. She's not a good example because that's such damn good dialogue that it's easy to memorize. But I mean, by and large, it's easier to memorize. You hear that all the time, but it's true. It's easier to memorize.
Yeah, there's a book that really blew my mind that is talking a little bit about this. Barry Edelstein's book, Thinking Shakespeare, which was really kind of, I actually came to it only about maybe 10 or 12 years ago. And a lot of what he talks about in that is phrasing with the verse line, which is a sort of contentious thing about, I mean, sort of before that I had Shakespeare rep, now Chicago Shakespeare, really worked with the folio. So their big thing was folio technique. And you go back to the folio text and you look at the way those are punctuated and the way those, and that there was a whole theory about that and about what commas mean and what semicolons mean and how you should approach all of that and mid-stops and things like that. And so I was kind of weaned on all that in my early days as a professional actor, and which kind of floated nicely into what Edelstein talks about in Thinking Shakespeare and phrasing with the verse line. And I found that, some of these things like, we tend to think in iambic pentameter, or we think ahead in about the same amount as a single line of iambic pentameter. That's how the brain works. And then, so like a lot of times with a verse line, you'll get to the end of it and you're just like, well, the thought hasn't finished. So you can't just stop at the end of the verse line. But we do that all the time in life, right? We always stop and think about the next thing we're gonna say. So like that was suddenly, like that was such a kind of revelatory thing for me to think about, like, oh, and 9 times out of 10, it'll work for me to phrase with the verse line in that way. And there are some times where you're like, you really can't do it there. But to just sort of in the moment at the end of a verse line, just have just a breath to think about what is the next thing I'm gonna say, if it's in the middle of a thought or something like that. And then and then not pausing in the middle of the line if there's some kind of punctuation, having to jump right to the next thought in the middle of the line, it just activates the language in this really exciting way. And I kind of couldn't believe it took me that long to like learn all this stuff. I was like, wait, why am I learning about all this now? Well, I had learned about it before and I didn't like it, but for some reason, sometimes you learn about something and then you're not in the right place in your life or your age to hear it. And then I was just ready to hear it at that point, I guess. But, so like if you look at like a script of mine of Shakespeare's, you would probably see a lot of, like I take a lot of, I look through the lexicon, I look up every possible meaning of every word I have to say, like, because you just never know. Somebody might have a slight color on the word that you've never thought of before, and you go, oh, and it just will open up the whole line for you in a new way, and you'll go. So I tend to like look up as many kinds of different glosses on the words and what they meant at the time, and then, it's so funny because you have the porter in the scene where you're doing it all in sort of contemporary vernacular. Yeah. That's another step that I always do with the verse, is I don't always write it out in paraphrase, but I always paraphrase everything I say, so that I put it in my own language first, and I put it in my own, because then I have a different sort of attachment to it, and I guess the stakes of it feel a little different than when you can put it into your own words as much as possible. And then, so like my script will be just covered in like notes of like modern vernacular of how I would say this, and all these different or great like notes I read from various sources about the character, some little thing that I find really illuminating about a moment or the character I'm playing or whatever, I'll write it and I'll have it as this sort of touchstone to go back to for the scene. Yeah, so that's kind of been my process with the language,
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
A career's journey.
Yeah. Yeah. This stuff keeps revealing itself to you. That's why it's still around, you know.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, because we were talking at lunch about life in Shakespeare, and you know, some of these like plays I've done so many times at this point. Julius Caesar, I think I've done 5 times.
Yeah.
Hamlet, I was lucky enough to get to do twice. But every time I came back to the play, there was so much more there. And there was so much, and from a different age, you experience it in a completely different way. And there's suddenly so much more life experience that you have to bring to the play. And it's great. It's great
What
stuff.
year, what year about did you play the role of Hamlet?
I did.
What year-ish?
I played it when I was 27,
Uh-huh.
and then I played it again when I was 40.
Oh, wow.
And it was wild. Because at 27, you know, you have no concept of your own death. You know, you're just like, or at least I didn't. Maybe other people do who've had a more, who've had more challenges than I had at that time in my life. But I was just like, I had no sense of my own mortality at that time. And at 40, I sure did. So it was just like approaching the role suddenly from that place was like from that place was so eye-opening. Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Chris,
That's really wild.
tell me about, you're a great serious actor, but you are also a phenomenal clown.
Thank you.
And, you know, the world, it seems, is getting scareder and scareder of clowns, and the world of clowning, it seems to me.
Oh, yeah.
They've become a thing that's almost kind of forbidden or frightening. And just the power of the clown on stage, specifically Shakespeare's stage, has always been really interesting to me. Can you reflect upon or share any thoughts you have about this act of being one of Shakespeare's clowns? And
It's really funny because I think that in this round in particular, and we did this before, I don't know, was it 8 years ago?
I think it's almost 10. But
Almost 10, wow. It feels different this time, and I think that has to do with the time that has passed. I think that the comedians and the Shakespeare clowns are whatever in any aspect of the entertainment world, I think is always funnier the more outrageous that it is. And compared to 10 years ago-ish, I think that we live in a time now when it is anathema to be outrageous. It's anathema to sort of, in a sense, this is a fantastic time to be a Shakespeare fool, because they're the ones who are dangerously just saying what you're not supposed to say. And I think it's even a danger within our industry, that is to say, to be arbiters of what is and what is not, acceptable. And that, and the clowns, it seems, are the ones I'm thinking of. It's like the Festies and the Lear's Fools and Touchstone, and certainly the Porter is sort of the one who wanders on drunk and just says what needs to be said in a bizarre way too. That I'm feeling it this time in a way that like he's sort of crawling out and saying, "We're all going to hell." In a handbasket, you do understand that, don't you? I love how that falls into like the Hamlet thing of, oh my God, if you treated us all according to our deserts, then who would escape whipping? It's like we're all sons of bitches. We just think otherwise. We think that we think so highly of ourselves in different ways, and I think that it's. in a sense, it's more gratifying because, generally speaking, we live in a time when people take themselves way too seriously.
Yeah.
No.
Well, you feel it even in the audience. Sometimes people
Yeah.
hold their breath when they feel like going off script, and react. You can't do that. It's just
Right.
Yeah.
to a 400-some-year-old play. It's just interesting that that's a reaction someone would have in 2024.
I found that, see, I'll sort of, it doesn't, well, this is sort of at the end of our journey-ish with this anyway, so I'm not giving anything away, but I've found in a few different productions, I do a lot of clowning, but I mean, I found in a few different productions sort of recently, even in the last few years, that it's not, exclusive to, today, 2024, but I mean, it's, as you've heard already, it's like one of my lead-ins that I like to do, if it happens, is they're laughing right away, at whatever. I get out of the thing, I raise up, I get a head rush, and I'm like, ow, ow, ow. And if they laugh, then the first thing I can say is, it's not funny. And then that's even funnier. Yeah. It's like, that it's not funny is sort of the invitation, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, audiences love to be acknowledged. I mean, it's my favorite nights. It doesn't happen every night. It's only happened a handful of times, but there are some nights where, when I first come out and I say, I'm talking about my husband, and I say, you're gonna get what you're promised, but then she shifts and says, yet do I fear thy nature. And there are a couple of nights where it's gotten a laugh. It gets a little titter. And I just look at them and I go, and I nod at them, and they love it, and they laugh more. They love to be invited in like that. And that's one of the things I think that's so great about Shakespeare is he gives you permission to do that almost anywhere you want to, really, because the play is a constant dialogue with the audience. It's not this precious thing where we have to pretend they're not there or something. Yeah. It's like, they're always there. And, it reminds me of another great verse coach person I worked with. I can't remember his name now. He was a London guy, and he used to talk about, like, speeches where you would never think to, like, why don't you employ the audience in this moment on your side? Ask them to be part of this argument that you're having with this person on stage. That most of the time you would just think, oh, it's just an argument between the two of us. But no, why not they? Why can't they be part of it and ask them? Yeah. And it's one of the great things about Shakespeare. So yeah. Anyway.
Also like an unnerving thing. I remember the first time that we did this. And it's like one of the other great things, which Scott is bringing up, which is like any time I read any role, it doesn't matter if it's contemporary play or what. If Hedgerow's talking about a show that I might want to do in the fall or something like that, and I just comb through it, and it's one I don't know, but I'm like, oh, it's a storyteller. It's a person who's taking the audience directly through this, and I always love to do that. Yeah. I think that's kind of one of the real. I just have to say, one of my favorite moments in this is also when we're at the banquet scene here, and after Mr. M's great big tirade where he ends up on the banquet table holding the tablecloth, and we're all like, what the fuck? and basically Scott, Lady M, releases us all by saying, you've displaced the mirth.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's for all of us.
It's a great release for them. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Attention.
Have you done?
Built in.
You have what like fools have you played? Clowns in the Shakespeares?
I played the Fool in King Lear a couple of times, which I loved. Very different both times. And I played, which was probably one of my favorite Shakespeares ever. I played Ague Cheek.
Oh my God,
yes. Just, yeah.
Yeah.
And I know I've played others, but they're slipping my mind now. Those are the two that come to mind.
Yep. God, I'd love to see your Fool. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It was fun. It was very fun.
Yeah.
Because some of the language of the Fool in Lear is so like, what? But when you start to get down into it and figure out what it is he's actually saying.
And he's also relentless the way he just speaks the truth to him, no matter how brutal it may seem, or
Yeah, in the most recent Sam Mendes production, the one with Simon Russell Beale, the Fool was slaughtered by King Lear in the end of the wilderness scene.
Okay.
And it
On
was,
purpose or?
yeah,
accident?
in a rage, in a
Oh,
fit, and it
wow.
was one of the most disturbing. Like the
Wow.
play kind of ended there for me personally.
Wow, yeah.
It was very startling.
Sort of like when Pinocchio tears the cricket limb from limb.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it was interesting.
That's crazy.
Boy, that's
Um,
interesting though.
Scott, before we wrap up,
Yeah.
I'm just curious, as we get to the end of this run, this incredible woman that is Lady Macbeth
Yeah.
that you have created in such an extraordinary fashion. I've said this in a number of other interviews, but reference seeing your Queen Margaret
Mm.
in Rose Rage, the Henry VI's, and just what that did to me as a young artist and director of Shakespeare, and then the journey into this role. Is there anything that sort of, as you think about that process of playing these incredibly powerful, usually villainized women,
Mm.
that has sort of proved interesting to you?
Well, the thing that comes to mind, and I was thinking about this earlier actually, is the world has changed so much in the last 20 years in terms of questions about gender and things like this. And I remember, like I was so excited to play Margaret when I played it in Rose Rage. I think they wanted me to come in and read for Henry, and I was like, no, I want to play Margaret. Are you kidding me? And so I went in and I auditioned for it, and they cast me. But this was still a time when, I want to phrase this carefully, because it's still dangerous for a man to play a woman. But at the time, it really felt like, it didn't feel like, oh God, how do I open this whole can of worms? I grew up as a queer actor in the business, and I felt like my femininity was something that I had to suppress for a great deal of my career in order to get jobs, especially when I was younger, starting out in the business. Like any kind of, feminine impulses I had or expression, what we typically think of as feminine. I had to go into the audition and be masculine, and I had to do that, and I had to dress a certain way, and I had to, there was just, and even to an extent when I played Margaret, that was still true, and there was still, a little piece of me that felt, I don't know if afraid is the word, but there's a little piece of me that just felt like, I'm not sure how to bring my full self to this in a way. And it's been interesting to not feel that way on this project because of how much the world has changed. It's like, I can bring everything to it this time around. And not that I didn't last time. I mean, I certainly did try to bring everything to Margaret, but it was a different world, and it was a different, there was an awareness of like, I am a man playing a woman back then in a way that just doesn't feel the same nowadays. Everything feels a little blurrier, which I like, and I don't feel any fear or worry or concern about letting certain impulses come out or direct me or whatever. And I think that's great.
Yeah.
And I think that can only help the work, But I guess that's the thing that sort of stands out to me about now having played a woman twice in Shakespeare, almost 20 years apart.
Wow.
Yeah,
Huh.
it's crazy. 2004. It was 20 years ago.
And was there anything that, in working on this, that you sort of came in with a preconceived notion or a presumption of who this woman was that has changed since you've built her or performed her?
I don't know if I had a preconceived notion about her. I have tried to stay open in this run to things sort of deepening and developing, and I think there are things that you don't think at the beginning are as important that by the time you get towards the end of the run you go, oh no, this is very important. Like, I'm thinking about I guess I'm thinking about this one scene right now. I'm thinking specifically about the coronation scene where the way we've staged it is, Macbeth is talking about Banquo and Banquo's child, and so much of, I think, what happens between Lady Macbeth and the dissolution of their marriage, and the dissolution of their marriage, the dissolution of their minds, I guess, and therefore the dissolution of their marriage in a way, has to do with this notion of this child and what this child was, and the fact that there are no children between them, and whatever that reason is, which I have a whole backstory about what that is. But that scene for me has become very much about Fleance, Banquo's child, sitting there in a way that it wasn't in the beginning. In the beginning, I was thinking of it much more as a political scene, and like Banquo's leaving, and Macbeth's talking too much, and it was just all this very, and now it's just a scene about wishing I could give my husband a child, and it's become this very different scene for me because of that, and so yeah, I mean that. But in terms of preconceived notions, it's an interesting. I think you don't ever. Well, we all have a certain preconceived notions about roles that we have before we go into them, before we actually live in them, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think I had any preconceived notions that I have proven untrue. I think it's just the depth of once you actually live in them and you realize how deep certain things go, and you're like, oh, I never knew it was that. I never knew there was all that there.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. Because it's Shakespeare. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
Throughout a run, throughout a life, throughout a career.
One of the things that I never imagined that we'd be doing this again. That I'd be playing this track of Duncan and the Porter and Hecate, and it never, you know what I mean? It never occurred to me until you guys contacted me, and I was just like, one of the really cool things too about the Shakespeare canon and this is that you probably will return to it. Yeah. You know, maybe not in the same role and all that, but it's really cool like that. I mean, in a sense, as we come to a close here, I'm like, oh damn, like there are certain things that are opening up, for me in certain ways, and I'm like, and it feels like this is the end of a great, few weeks of previews. And now we're really, now we can really sort of start to bat this around. But the thing is that you can, in a way, I mean, in the long run, if you're lucky, I think.
Yeah.
We get to return to these plays.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's been such a gift to me and to Quintessence and to all of our audiences to have both of you here with us on this one. So thank you so much, and thank you for sharing these thoughts with us. And
thank you for having us.
Thank you.
It's been a thrill to do it.
A wonderful final weekend of performances.
Yes.